Of course, he would have a first-class ticket. The thought, sharp and venomous, coiled in Penelope Vance's mind as she watched the boy approach the gate. It wasn't just a thought, it was a verdict. In her 15 years of service with Airline Airlines, she'd cultivated a keen eye for discrepancies. And this was a glaring one. A child no older than 10, with skin the color of rich coffee, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, clutching a pristine first-class ticket sleeve. He was alone. It was a picture that didn't compute, a puzzle with ill-fitting pieces. And Penelope, guardian of this silver-winged sanctuary, was more than ready to solve it. The fluorescent lights of Chicago O'Hare's Terminal 3 hummed with a monotonous, oppressive energy that mirrored Penelope Vance's mood. It was the last leg of a grueling 4-day rotation, a dizzying blur of time zones, recycled air, and the endlessly needy faces of passengers. Her smile, once a genuine asset, now felt like a prosthetic, carefully affixed each morning and peeled off with a sigh of relief each night. At 42, she was a senior flight attendant, a title that was supposed to confer respect and authority, but lately felt more like a label for a piece of aging, permanent cabin furniture. The flight today was AW 716, a non-stop service to London Heathrow. It was a flagship route, the pride of Airline Airlines, and first class was her domain. She guarded its plush, taupe leather seats and exclusive champagne selection with the ferocity of a dragon guarding its hoard. It was a world of curated perfection, a bubble of civility and privilege at 35,000 feet, and she was its uncompromising gatekeeper. Her standards were exacting, her eye for detail legendary among the junior crew. She could spot a scuff on a loafer from 10 paces and detect the faint aroma of economy-class peanuts on a passenger attempting to sneak into the forward lavatory. Her gaze swept the boarding area, a sea of hurried, anxious humanity. She saw the usual cast of characters, the over-caffeinated businessman barking into his phone, the nervous family with their mountain of carry-ons, the young couple drunk on love and duty-free Prosecco. Then she saw him. He was walking toward the priority boarding lane, a small figure moving with a quiet deliberateness that stood out amidst the chaos. It was the boy from before, Leo Sterling, the name on the ticket now held by the gate agent. He held a small, dark blue backpack in one hand and his boarding pass in the other. He wasn't running or yelling, just walking with a solemnity that seemed too mature for his years. Penelope felt the familiar, acidic churn of suspicion in her gut. She'd seen it all before. Elaborate scams, counterfeit tickets, sob stories designed to wheedle a free upgrade out of a soft-hearted junior attendant. She had built her career on being anything but soft-hearted. She prided herself on protecting the company's revenue and the sanctity of the first-class experience. The other passengers in that cabin paid thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars for their ticket. It was her duty to ensure their investment wasn't diluted by interlopers. As the gate agent, a harried-looking man named Michael, scanned the boy's pass, a cheerful beep echoed through the terminal. "All right, Leo, seat 2A. Right this way, just follow the jet bridge, and the crew will help you on board." Leo gave a small nod, his eyes wide as he looked down the long tunnel toward the aircraft. He looked less like a seasoned first-class traveler and more like a child on the verge of being swallowed by a whale. Penelope stepped forward, her heels clicking with sharp authority on the polished floor. "One moment, Michael," she said, her voice smooth but edged with steel. She held out her hand. "May I see that?" Michael, caught off guard, hesitated. "It's scanned through, Penelope. It's a valid ticket." "I'm sure it is," she replied, not breaking eye contact with him. "I'd just like to verify it myself. Company policy, unaccompanied minor in a premium cabin." She invented the policy on the spot, a tool she often used to assert her dominance. Reluctantly, Michael handed her the boarding pass. Penelope examined it under the harsh light. Sterling, Leo, seat 2A, priority A. The paper was crisp, the printing perfect. It was a full-fare F-class ticket, the most expensive and flexible kind. A ticket that cost more than her monthly mortgage payment. It was absurd. A child this young, dressed so ordinarily, holding a ticket like this? The father was probably some mid-level musician or athlete who had a sudden windfall and no class. He likely bought the ticket to show off, sending his son alone as a status symbol. The thought soured her mood further. She turned her attention to the boy, who was now watching her with a mixture of confusion and apprehension. His large, dark eyes were unblinking. "Hello," Penelope said, her voice dripping with a cloying, false sweetness. "And where are your parents?" Leo clutched the strap of his backpack a little tighter. "My dad dropped me off," he said softly. "I'm meeting my grandma and grandpa in London." "I see, your dad. And what does he do? This dad who buys his son a ticket that costs more than a car?" The question was sarcastic, accusatory. She wasn't just asking, she was interrogating. Leo seemed taken aback. He works. He's in business." "Business?" Penelope repeated, drawing the word out as if it were a foreign, unbelievable concept. "Of course he is." She looked back at the boarding pass, then at the boy's simple black hoodie and well-worn sneakers. The disconnect was jarring, and to her prejudiced mind, it was proof of a lie. "This is a very expensive ticket, young man. It's highly unusual for someone like you to be traveling this way. Alone." The phrase, "someone like you," hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Leo flinched, his brow furrowing. He understood her meaning, if not the reason for it. He was 10, but he was not naive. He'd seen the way people looked at his father sometimes, a mix of awe and suspicion, before they knew who he was. "My dad bought it for me," Leo insisted, his voice a little stronger now. "He said it would be more comfortable since it's a long flight." "How considerate of him," Penelope sneered. She handed the boarding pass back to Michael but positioned herself between Leo and the jet bridge entrance. She was making a stand. This felt wrong, and her gut, honed by years of cynicism, was screaming at her. She wasn't going to be the fool who let a scam artist into her cabin. She was Penelope Vance, and she was the last line of defense for Aura Wing's integrity. Her integrity. The two had long since become inseparable in her mind. The line of first and business class passengers was beginning to swell behind them, a murmur of impatient coughs and shifting leather briefcases. Penelope was creating a bottleneck, a cardinal sin in the time-sensitive world of airline operations, but she was undeterred. This was more important than an on-time departure. This was about principle. "Penelope, we need to keep the line moving," Michael urged, his voice low and tense. He shot an apologetic glance at Leo, who stood frozen, the object of a very public and humiliating spectacle. "The line will move when I am satisfied that this is a legitimate passenger," Penelope retorted, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. She turned back to Leo, her eyes narrowing. "Do you have an ID? Some form of identification?" Leo looked bewildered. "I'm 10. I have my school ID?" He fumbled with the zipper on his backpack, his small hands shaking slightly. He pulled out a laminated card with his photo, his name, Leo Sterling, and the crest of the prestigious Northwood Preparatory Academy. Penelope snatched it from his hand. She scrutinized the card, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Northwood Prep was notoriously exclusive, with tuition fees that rivaled a university's. This complicated her narrative. It didn't fit the picture of a common street scammer, but instead of reconsidering, her mind twisted the new information to fit her prejudice. A scholarship kid, then. Someone who didn't really belong, given a temporary pass into a world of wealth, and now acting the part. It made her even more resentful. "This doesn't prove anything about the ticket," she declared, handing the ID back dismissively. "Who did your father speak to when he booked this? What's his name? I'm going to have to call the ticketing desk and verify the payment method." I don't know," Leo stammered. "He did it on his computer. His name is Robert Sterling." "Robert Sterling," Penelope repeated with a roll of her eyes. A common enough name. Utterly meaningless. She was convinced it was a fabrication. A man in a tailored Bryony suit, waiting impatiently behind them, spoke up. "Is there a problem here? Some of us have connections to make." Penelope gave him her most practiced, reassuring smile. "My apologies, sir. Just ensuring the security and integrity of our first-class cabin. It will only be a moment." Her words were professional, but her actions were anything but. She was making a show of it, performing her diligence for the other premium passengers, reinforcing her own importance. She pulled out her company-issued phone and pretended to dial. It was pure theatrics. She had no intention of calling the ticketing desk, which was a chaotic mess during boarding. She wanted to intimidate the boy into a confession. "Yes, this is Penelope Vance, senior flight attendant on AW7116s to Heathrow," she spoke into the phone. "I have a situation at the gate. A suspicious ticket in first class. Passenger name Sterling, Leo. Can you verify the form of payment on that booking?" "Yes, I'll hold." Leo watched her, his heart pounding. He didn't understand what was happening. His dad had walked him to security, given him a hug, and told him to be brave and have a great adventure. He had said that the people on the plane worked for his company and would take wonderful care of him. But this woman was not wonderful. She was mean. She was looking at him like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, and he fought them back fiercely. He was not going to cry. His dad had told him to be strong. He wished he could call him. His phone was in his backpack, but he was too scared to take it out. It felt like anything he did would just make the angry woman angrier. A younger flight attendant, Chloe, who was supposed to be helping in the business class cabin, walked up from the jet bridge. "Penelope, is everything okay? Captain Armstrong is asking why the first-class boarding has stopped." "Everything is under control, Chloe," Penelope said sharply, not taking her eyes off Leo. "Go back to the cabin. I am handling a potential fraudulent passenger." Chloe's eyes widened. She looked from Penelope's rigid, hostile posture to the small, terrified boy. "A fraudulent passenger?" she whispered, confused. "He's just a child." "Exactly," Penelope hissed. "That's the scam. They use a child because people like you are too naive to question it. Now go." Chloe, intimidated by Penelope's seniority and venomous tone, retreated back into the jet bridge, casting a worried look over her shoulder. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Passengers were now openly grumbling. Michael, the gate agent, was sweating, speaking frantically into his walkie-talkie. Penelope, however, seemed to draw strength from the chaos she was creating. She felt powerful, in control. "Ah, yes," she said into her phone, her voice filled with false discovery. "I see. Just as I suspected." She hung up, a triumphant, cruel smirk playing on her lips. She looked down at Leo, her eyes cold and hard as stone. "Your ticket was flagged," she lied, her voice ringing with finality. "The payment authorization was declined. This ticket is invalid." The words hit Leo like a physical blow. "Invalid? But my dad bought it. I watched him." His voice trembled, a desperate plea for reason in a situation that had spiraled into a nightmare. "He wouldn't make a mistake." "Fathers make mistakes all the time, little boy," Penelope said, her tone condescending. "And sometimes they lie." She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "Why don't you just tell me the truth? Who really gave you this ticket? Did you find it? Did someone put you up to this? It will be much easier for you if you just confess now." Leo shook his head, the tears he'd been fighting finally spilling over, tracing silent paths down his cheeks. "No, my dad is Robert Sterling. He bought the ticket. It's real." The sight of his tears didn't soften Penelope. It hardened her. To her, it was an admission of guilt, the last resort of a cornered liar. The public display, the holding up of the flight, her entire professional judgment was on the line. She had to see this through. She had gone too far to back down now. "That's enough," she declared, her voice rising again to command the attention of the surrounding crowd. "We're not having this discussion any further." She reached out and snatched the boarding pass sleeve from Leo's hand. He gasped, trying to hold on to it, but her grip was like iron. She held the ticket up for all to see, a prosecutor presenting damning evidence to a jury. "This ticket," she announced, "is fraudulent. This child is not a passenger on this flight." A collective gasp went through the onlookers. The businessman in the Brioni suit grunted with approval. "Good. Knew something was off. Waste of our time." But a young woman standing nearby, holding her own baby, looked horrified. He's a child, she said to her husband. What is she doing? Leo looked around wildly, his face streaked with tears, searching for a friendly face, an ally. But all he saw was a blur of confusion, anger, and pity. He felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. Please, he whispered, his voice cracking. Please, can I just call my dad? You can talk to him. We are past the point of phone calls, Penelope said coldly. Then, in a moment of supreme theatrical arrogance, she did the unthinkable. With a sharp, deliberate motion, she ripped the ticket in half. A gasp, louder this time, rippled through the gate area. She then tore the two halves into quarters. The crisp, tearing sound cut through the terminal's hum with shocking finality. She let the pieces of the expensive first-class ticket flutter from her fingers to the floor, a confetti of cruelty at Leo's feet. Now, she said, her voice devoid of all emotion, you need to leave the boarding area. Go back to your father and tell him his little scheme didn't work. Not on my watch. She turned to Michael, who was staring at the pieces of the ticket on the floor, his face pale with shock. Michael, call airport security. Have this child escorted from the terminal. Penelope, no, Michael protested, his professionalism finally cracking. You can't do that. We can't just abandon a child in the airport. His ticket scanned green. We have to follow procedure. We have to contact a supervisor. I am the supervisor on this aircraft, Penelope snapped, her authority absolute in her own mind. And my decision is final. The safety and security of my flight come first. This boy is a security risk. For all we know, he's a decoy, a distraction. Get him out of here. Now. Her words, filled with paranoia and self-importance, stunned Michael into silence. The chain of command was clear, even if the command itself was monstrous. A senior crew member's word on matters of cabin security carried immense weight. Arguing further could put his own job at risk. Leo was sobbing openly now, his small body shaking. The world had tilted on its axis. He had gone from an excited adventurer to a discarded piece of trash in the span of 10 minutes. He looked at the torn pieces of his ticket, the key to his journey, now just litter on a dirty floor. He looked at the woman's unyielding face, a mask of cold triumph. She had won. He had lost. As a bewildered-looking Michael reluctantly reached for his walkie-talkie to call security, the jet bridge phone buzzed insistently. At the same time, the phone in the cockpit began to ring. Up on the flight deck, Captain Alistair Armstrong, a veteran pilot with a calm demeanor and a low tolerance for drama, was getting annoyed. The flight was already 10 minutes behind schedule, and the gate was in chaos. He answered the cockpit phone. Flight deck, Armstrong. The voice on the other end was not from the tower or ground control. It was crisp, clear, and radiated an aura of immense, unshakable authority. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question. Captain Armstrong, this is Robert Sterling. I seem to have two problems you can help me with. First, your flight is showing a delay. Second, my 10-year-old son is calling me from your jet bridge, crying his eyes out, saying one of your flight attendants just ripped up his ticket and is having him thrown out of the airport. Perhaps you could enlighten me as to what, precisely, is going on with the airline I own. Captain Armstrong went rigid in his seat. Robert Sterling. The Robert Sterling. The enigmatic, rarely seen founder and majority shareholder of the entire Aura Wing global enterprise. The man who had built the airline from a fleet of 3 aging planes into an industry titan. The man whose name was whispered with a mixture of reverence and fear in the corporate headquarters. He had never spoken to him. He never expected to. The captain's mind raced, trying to process the impossible words he had just heard. My son ripped up his ticket, the airline I own. It was a cascade of information so catastrophic that it barely seemed real. Mr. Sterling, sir, Armstrong stammered, his usual calm evaporating into the pressurized air of the cockpit. There must be a misunderstanding. I'm on the flight deck. Let me go to the gate immediately. You do that, Captain, Sterling's voice replied, devoid of heat but colder and sharper than a shard of ice. My son's name is Leo. He is 10 years old. He is wearing a blue hoodie and is traveling alone to see his grandparents. Find him, and find the employee who did this. I'll be holding." The line didn't disconnect. An open channel of judgment was now broadcasting directly into the cockpit. Armstrong unbuckled himself, his face grim. "Dave," he said to his first officer, "stay here. Don't say a word to anyone." He wrenched open the cockpit door and stormed into the galley, his eyes blazing. Chloe, the junior attendant, was standing there wringing her hands. "What in God's name is happening at that gate?" Armstrong demanded. "It's Penelope, Captain," Chloe whispered, her face pale. She said a little boy's ticket was fake. She ripped it up and called for security." The captain didn't wait to hear more. He strode down the jet bridge, his polished pilot shoes pounding against the metal floor. The scene at the gate was one of frozen chaos. Penelope stood with her arms crossed, a bastion of smug satisfaction. Michael was talking into his radio, his back to the scene, and there, by the scattered remains of his boarding pass, was a small, sobbing boy. It was exactly as Robert Sterling had described. "What is this?" Armstrong's voice boomed, cutting through the tension. Every head snapped toward him. Penelope turned, her expression shifting from triumph to annoyance at being questioned by the captain. "Captain, I've handled it. It was a security issue, a fraudulent passenger. I've denied him boarding." "You did what?" Armstrong stared at her, then at the torn ticket on the floor. "Was this passenger's name Leo Sterling?" A flicker of uncertainty finally crossed Penelope's face. The captain, using the boy's full name, was unexpected. "Yes, how did you—" "Penelope, what was your justification for this action?" the captain asked, his voice dangerously low. "Did you verify the ticket with a supervisor?" "I am the cabin supervisor," she insisted, puffing out her chest. "I made a judgment call. The circumstances were highly suspicious. The form of payment was declined." "You're lying," Armstrong stated flatly. "You didn't call anyone, did you?" Her face paled. I used my professional discretion." "Your discretion?" The captain took a step closer, his towering height and stern expression making her shrink back. "I am on an open line with Mr. Robert Sterling, the owner of this airline. He would like to know why you are attempting to have his son arrested." The name hit the gate area like a detonation. Robert Sterling. Michael, the gate agent, dropped his walkie-talkie. It clattered to the floor with a loud crack. The businessman in the Brioni suit, who had been enjoying the show, suddenly looked as if he was about to be sick. Every Aura Wing employee within earshot froze in sheer terror. Penelope's smug mask didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. Her face went from pink to white to a mottled shade of gray. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The carefully constructed world of her own authority, her righteous crusade, had just been vaporized by a single name. The boy, the ordinary-looking boy in the hoodie, Sterling. It was the same name on the tail of every plane, on every corporate letterhead, on her own paycheck. The realization was so immense, so soul-crushingly absolute, that her mind simply refused to process it for a second. Captain Armstrong didn't wait for her to recover. He knelt down, his expression softening as he addressed the weeping child. "Leo," he said gently, "I'm Captain Armstrong. I am so sorry. There has been a terrible, terrible mistake. We are going to fix this right now." Leo looked up, his tear-filled eyes wide with confusion and a dawning sliver of hope. The captain stood and pointed a trembling, furious finger at Penelope. "You, do not move. Do not speak to anyone. Your career is the least of your problems right now." He turned to Michael. "Get on the phone with airport operations. Tell them Richard Cole needs to be at this gate in 5 minutes or Robert Sterling will be shutting down our hub." Richard Cole was the vice president of North American operations. The mention of his name, combined with the threat, sent a fresh wave of panic through the assembled staff. This was no longer an incident, it was a corporate meltdown, happening in real time, in full view of the public. And on the other end of the open phone line in the quiet cockpit, Robert Sterling listened to it all. He heard the captain's commands, the gasps of the staff, and the broken, hiccuping sobs of his son. And he waited. The next 10 minutes were a masterclass in corporate panic. Word spread through the terminal with the speed of a wildfire. Gate agents from other flights crept closer, trying to catch a glimpse of the unfolding disaster. The remaining first-class passengers who had witnessed the event either stared in stunned silence or began furiously typing on their phones, no doubt recounting the incredible tale to colleagues or on social media. The student who had been quietly recording the initial confrontation now held his phone up with less subtlety, documenting the spectacular fallout. Penelope Vance stood as if she'd been turned to stone, her face a blank canvas of shock. The torn pieces of the ticket at her feet were no longer a symbol of her authority, but the epitaph of her career. The smugness, the certainty, the righteous indignation. It had all curdled into a thick, suffocating dread. She kept replaying the scene in her mind, her own sneering words, the satisfying rip of the paper, the boy's tears. Each memory was now a nail being hammered into her coffin. Someone like you. Go back to your father. The words echoed in her skull, laced with a new and horrifying irony. Before the 5-minute deadline was up, Richard Cole, the VP of Operations, came sprinting down the concourse, his tie askew and a film of sweat on his brow. He was a man accustomed to plush boardrooms and strategic planning, not frontline emergencies. He looked like he had aged a decade in the 2-block journey from his office. "Captain," he gasped, rushing toward Armstrong. "What happened? I got a call." "She happened," Armstrong said grimly, gesturing toward Penelope. "She accused Mr. Sterling's son of being a fraud, publicly humiliated him, ripped up his confirmed first-class ticket, and was in the process of having him removed by security." Cole's eyes bulged. He looked at Leo, who was now being gently consoled by Chloe, the junior attendant, who had brought him a bottle of water. He then looked at Penelope, and the color drained from his face. He knew her. He'd given her a 15-year service pin at a ceremony just last year. "Penelope?" he whispered, his voice full of disbelief. Penelope finally found her voice, a pathetic, trembling squeak. "Mr. Cole, I made a mistake. I didn't know." "You didn't know?" Armstrong cut her off, his voice ringing with contempt. "You didn't know you shouldn't scream at a child? You didn't know you shouldn't destroy a valid travel document? You didn't know you shouldn't treat a human being, a child, with such contempt and prejudice, regardless of who his father is?" He took a deep breath and then delivered the final, crushing blow. "Mr. Sterling is still on the line in the cockpit. He wants a word with you." If Penelope had looked pale before, she was now translucent. The thought of speaking directly to the man whose life's work she had just so casually insulted, whose son she had tormented, was beyond terrifying. It was apocalyptic. Flanked by the captain and the VP, she was marched down the jet bridge like a prisoner on her way to the gallows. The other crew members averted their eyes. The walk felt like a mile. When they entered the silent, sterile flight deck, the first officer, Dave, looked up with wide, fearful eyes and pointed to the phone receiver lying on the center console. Armstrong picked it up. "Mr. Sterling, Captain Armstrong here. I have flight attendant Penelope Vance and VP Richard Cole with me." There was a pause, and then the same calm, cold voice filled the small space. "Put the phone on speaker, Captain." Armstrong complied. The air crackled with tension. "Ms. Vance," Robert Sterling began. His voice was unnervingly quiet. There was no yelling, no rage, just the precise, incisive tone of a surgeon about to make a cut. "For 15 years, you have worn the Aura Wing uniform. That uniform is supposed to signify safety, service, and respect. Today, you used it as a costume to bully a 10-year-old boy. Can you explain to me why?" Penelope trembled, tears of self-pity and fear now streaming down her face. "Sir, Mr. Sterling, I am so sorry. It was a misunderstanding. I was stressed. I made a terrible error in judgment. I saw him and he was alone, and his clothes. I just assumed." "You assumed," Sterling repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "You assumed my son's appearance meant he was unworthy of the seat he was in. You assumed your prejudice was a more reliable indicator than a validly issued top-tier ticket from your own company. You didn't make an error in judgment, Miss Vance. You made a choice. You chose to be cruel. You chose to humiliate a child in front of a crowd of people. You chose to abuse the authority this company gave you." He paused again, and the silence was deafening. "My son is a good kid, Mrs. Vance. He's a quiet, brave boy. I put him on that flight alone because I wanted to teach him independence. But more than that, I put him on that flight because I trusted my people. I trusted the company I built to protect him. You didn't just break my trust in you. You broke my trust in the culture I thought we had created." "Please," Penelope sobbed. "Please, I'll do anything. It won't happen again. I need this job." "No, Ms. Vance, you don't," Sterling said, his voice dropping to absolute zero. "You don't need this job because as of this moment, you no longer have it. Mr. Cole, you will see to it that Ms. Vance's employment is terminated immediately. Her credentials are to be revoked, and she is to be escorted from airport property. She is never to set foot on an Airwing aircraft or work for any of our subsidiary companies ever again. Is that clear?" "Yes, Mr. Sterling, crystal clear," Cole stammered, his eyes fixed on the floor. "As for the flight," Sterling continued, "you will hold that plane until my son is seated and comfortable. You will find another senior attendant to work the first-class cabin. Captain Armstrong will personally apologize to every single passenger for the delay you caused. And Mr. Cole, you and I will be having a very long conversation tomorrow morning about the service standards and diversity training in this company. My jet is on its way to O'Hare. I'll be flying to London with my son myself." With that, the line went dead. The reckoning was over. The aftermath was swift and surgical. Richard Cole, looking grim and defeated, personally escorted a now catatonic Penelope from the aircraft. She didn't say another word. As she was led back through the jet bridge, the passengers who remained at the gate watched her go. There were no jeers, no triumphant shouts, just a heavy, uncomfortable silence. They had witnessed a life unravel in real time, a spectacular fall from a position of minor power to absolute ruin. At the gate, Michael the agent was already reprinting Leo's ticket. A new senior flight attendant, pulled from a later flight, arrived, her face a mask of nervous efficiency. Captain Armstrong made a calm, professional announcement over the airport PA system, apologizing for the significant delay, citing an unforeseen staffing issue that had now been resolved. He didn't need to give details. Most people there already knew. Leo was treated with a reverence usually reserved for visiting royalty. Chloe walked him onto the plane, where Captain Armstrong personally showed him to his seat, 2A. He checked to make sure his television worked, brought him a glass of orange juice, and told him that if he needed anything at all, he was to tell one of the flight attendants, and they would get it for him immediately. The fear and confusion in Leo's eyes had been replaced by a quiet, weary bewilderment. He was just a kid who wanted to see his grandparents. He hadn't asked for any of this. An hour later, just as the plane was finally preparing for pushback, a sleek, private Gulfstream G650 taxied into a nearby stand. A tall, impeccably dressed man disembarked and was driven across the tarmac to the Airwing gate. Robert Sterling boarded flight AW716, walked quietly to seat 2B beside his son, and took his hand. He gave Leo a small, reassuring smile. He didn't make a scene. He didn't demand anything. He was just a father, there for his son. But his very presence sent a powerful, silent message throughout the entire aircraft and the company beyond. Penelope Vance was processed out in a small, windowless office near baggage claim. She handed over her badge, her company phone, and the keys to the crew lounge. She was given a box for her personal belongings from her locker. It wasn't much. A spare pair of shoes, some magazines, a framed photo of her younger self, smiling proudly in her brand new uniform 15 years ago. As she was escorted out of the terminal by a silent security guard, she walked past the large windows overlooking the airfield. Through the glass, she saw it, the massive Boeing 777 that was flight AW716, its powerful engines whining as it finally pushed back from the gate. She could just make out the windows of the first-class cabin, the little bubble of privilege she had guarded so jealously, so viciously. It was her world, her kingdom, and she was now exiled from it forever. She watched until the plane taxied away, turned onto the runway, and began its powerful, thundering ascent into the gray Chicago sky. It climbed higher and higher, a silver cross shrinking against the clouds, on its way to London, on its way to a future that she was no longer a part of. Standing there with her small box of belongings, Stripped of her uniform and her pride, Penelope Vance finally understood. She hadn't been guarding a sanctuary. She had been trapped in a prison of her own making, a cage built from bitterness, prejudice, and a desperate need to feel important. And the little boy in the hoodie hadn't been an interloper. He was the one who was truly free, soaring above it all, while she was left behind, grounded by the crushing weight of her own actions. Her descent had just begun, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that it was going to be a long, long way down. The automated glass doors of Terminal 3 hissed open, releasing Penelope Vance into the humid, exhaust-choked air of the passenger pickup lane. The Chicago evening felt heavy, pressing down on her with the weight of the sky. The familiar sounds of the airport, the whistles of traffic marshals, the rumble of shuttle buses, the cacophony of greetings and goodbyes, were now alien to her. For 15 years, this had been her world's nexus, the start and end point of every journey. Now it was the scene of her exile. The small cardboard box in her arms felt impossibly heavy, a pathetic collection of the remnants of a life that had ceased to exist an hour ago. She stood on the curb, adrift. Taxis swerved past, their drivers looking for travelers with luggage and purpose. Not a woman in a disheveled uniform with a haunted look in her eyes. The humiliation was a physical presence, a second skin clinging to her. She could still feel the phantom weight of her wings pin on her chest, the ghost of her ID badge on its lanyard. Without them, she felt naked, anonymous, and utterly powerless. A profound, chilling numbness held her mind hostage. She replayed the events, not in a linear fashion, but in searing, fragmented flashes. The boy's wide, trusting eyes, the satisfying tear of the ticket paper, the captain's booming voice, the disembodied surgical coldness of Robert Sterling's words through the speakerphone. "You chose to be cruel." The phrase ricocheted around her skull. Had she? She hadn't thought of it as cruelty. It had felt like order, justice, protecting her domain. But now, stripped of the context of her uniform and her self-importance, the act looked stark and ugly, even to her. She finally managed to hail a taxi, sinking into the worn vinyl of the back seat. The driver, a man with a kind, weary face, glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Tough day?" he asked, his voice accented. Penelope could only nod, staring blankly out the window as the familiar blue and gold logo of Airline Airline slid past on a massive billboard. "Fly with confidence," the slogan read. A bitter, hysterical laugh threatened to bubble up from her chest. She choked it down, the effort making her eyes water. The numbness began to recede on the long drive to her suburban apartment, replaced by the hot, frantic tendrils of panic. The mortgage, the car payment, her credit card debt, which had been steadily climbing. Her job wasn't just a job. It was the entire architecture of her financial stability. The shame of being fired was one thing. The terror of impending poverty was another, far more visceral threat. What would she do? Who would hire her? The airline industry was a small, gossipy world. News of this magnitude would travel fast. She wasn't just fired, she was blacklisted. When she arrived at her quiet, tidy apartment building, the place she'd always seen as her refuge from the chaos of travel, it felt different. It felt like a trap. Inside, she dropped the box on the floor and walked numbly to her laptop. She had a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to see the extent of the damage. She typed Airline Airlines into the search bar. The results hit her like a physical shockwave. It was everywhere. News sites, blogs, social media. The headline from a major news network blared, "Airline flight attendant fired on the spot after tearing up ticket of owner's son." And beneath it, there it was, the video. Shot on a phone, shaky but damningly clear. It started with her leaning over the boy, her voice dripping with condescension. It captured her snatching the ticket, her grand pronouncement, and the awful final rips of the paper. It captured Leo's small, heartbroken sobs. It was 10 times worse than she remembered. Seen through the objective lens of a camera, her actions were monstrous. She was a caricature of a villain, a bully in a neat little uniform. The comments section was a torrent of pure vitriol. Thousands of messages from around the world, all aimed at her. Her name, Penelope Vance, had been discovered and disseminated. She was a meme, a hashtag, Penelope, the patronizer, or a wing Karen. People were posting her photo, demanding she never work with the public again. Some had even found her social media profiles, which were now being flooded with hateful messages. She slammed the laptop shut, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't just a professional catastrophe. This was a public crucifixion. Robert Sterling hadn't just fired her. He had allowed her to be cast into the digital wilderness, to be torn apart by the anonymous wolves of the internet. The silence of her apartment was deafening, broken only by the frantic buzz of her phone on the counter. A reporter, then another. She didn't answer. She was no longer Penelope Vance, senior flight attendant. She was a pariah, and she was utterly, completely alone. Meanwhile, at 36,000 feet over the Atlantic, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin of AW 716 was one of hushed, surreal calm. The delayed flight was now running smoothly, the new cabin crew moving with a quiet, almost reverential efficiency. They attended to the passengers' needs, but their eyes kept flicking towards seats 2A and 2B. Robert Sterling had asked for nothing but a bottle of water. He had spent the first hour of the flight talking quietly with his son. Leo's tears had long since dried, but a shadow of the day's trauma remained in his eyes. "Why was she so angry, Dad?" Leo asked, his voice small against the hum of the engines. He was curled under a soft cashmere blanket, his head resting against the plush leather seat. Robert looked away from the dark, star-dusted sky outside the window and met his son's gaze. He chose his words carefully. "Sometimes, Leo, people get scared, and when they get scared, they get angry. I don't think she was angry at you. I think she was angry at her own life, and she tried to make herself feel powerful by making you feel small." "Because of how I was dressed?" "Maybe," Robert said with a sad sigh. "Some people, they build a little box in their minds, and they decide who is supposed to be inside the box and who is supposed to be outside. If they see something that doesn't fit, it scares them. It's not right and it's not fair. But it's about their fear, not about your worth. Do you understand?" Leo nodded slowly. "I think so. I wasn't scared. I was just sad that she thought I was a liar. I know, and I am so sorry that happened," Robert said, his hand resting on his son's shoulder. "But you were brave, you were strong, and you told the truth. That's all that ever matters." A little while later, as Leo drifted off to sleep watching a movie, Robert accepted a cup of coffee from the nervous flight attendant. His eyes scanned the cabin. He saw the businessman from the gate, the one in the Brioni suit who had grumbled his approval of Penelope's actions. The man was hunched over his laptop, studiously avoiding eye contact. Robert caught the flight attendant's eye and nodded subtly toward the man. "Please send that gentleman a bottle of our best champagne, with my compliments." The attendant, confused but obedient, procured the bottle. She presented it to the businessman. "Sir, with compliments from Mr. Sterling." The man's head snapped up. He looked at the expensive champagne, then over at Robert Sterling, who was watching him with a perfectly neutral expression. The gesture was, on the surface, magnanimous, but the meaning was clear. "I saw you. I heard you. I know who you are." A flush of deep, burning shame crept up the man's neck. He stammered his thanks, but he didn't open the bottle. It sat on the table beside him for the rest of the long flight, an effervescent monument to his own poor judgment. Robert then opened his own laptop. He wasn't watching a movie. He was connected to the onboard Wi-Fi, and he was working. The rage he felt was a cold, efficient fuel. He wasn't a man given to emotional outbursts. He was a man who built systems, and a system in his company had failed catastrophically. His email to Richard Cole and the entire executive board was brief and brutal. Subject: Mandatory action, the LS Initiative. All today's events at ORD have exposed a profound and unacceptable failure in our corporate culture. Effective immediately, we are launching the Leo Sterling Initiative. 1. A third-party firm will be hired by Monday to conduct a top-to-bottom audit of our service training, hiring practices, and protocols for handling customer disputes, with a focus on implicit bias. 2. All 40,000 global public-facing employees, from gate agents to pilots, will undergo a mandatory, comprehensive anti-bias and de-escalation training program. Certification will be required for continued employment. This is not a suggestion. 3. The story of what happened to my son will be the first case study in this new training. We will not hide from this. We will learn from it. 4. A new direct line of reporting for service-related ethical concerns will be established, bypassing the standard chain of command to ensure junior employees are empowered to report misconduct by seniors without fear of retribution. I expect a preliminary action plan on my desk when I land at Heathrow. This is not a PR problem to be managed. This is a cancer to be cut out. Fix it. RS. He hit send, the message flying from the stratosphere to the servers at Orwing Tower in Chicago. The tremors from Gate T3 were just beginning. The aftershocks would reshape his entire company. He looked over at his sleeping son, his reason for it all. The flight attendant who had tried to cast his son out had, in the end, only ensured that his name would be etched into the very core of the airline for years to come. That, my friends, is a story about how quickly a life can change. It's a stark reminder that the uniform you wear or the title you hold doesn't give you the right to look down on anyone. Penelope Vance thought her 15 years of service gave her power, but she confused authority with arrogance. She judged a child not by his character, but by the color of his skin and the clothes on his back, never imagining that he represented the very foundation of the company she worked for. The fallout wasn't just about her losing a job. It was about the complete and total demolition of her world due to her own prejudice. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe that kindness and respect should be the real priority pass in life, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more true life stories where consequences catch up in the most dramatic ways. Let us know in the comments. What would you have done if you were a passenger at that gate?